In a new video, we described a nerve-wracking misfortune, including John Edward Jones at Nutty Clay Cave. In 2009, Jones' misfortune started when he messed up driving him into an unsafe thin entry, where he became caught in dimness anyway. What many don't understand is that John wasn't quick to stand up to such distress. Here at the Workforce of Truth, we reveal one more enthralling story from 1965, including Maurice Strong, whose experience reflects John's like Nutty Clay Cave episode. Maurice made an off-base turn, winding up wedged in a tight cleft. With no way out, the thing followed was a holding 25-hour salvage mission, perpetually drawing the risks of underground investigation into history. On a fresh harvest time morning, in the immense park, the ideal setting for an excursion, 16 young people and 3 educators from the Methodist Youngsters' Home in Berea left on an arrangement stumble on October 5, 1965 to Schönbrunn town in Tuscara West District anyway. A lamentable punctured tire occurrence on the way constrained them to change their direction. Fast reasoning and act of spontaneity drove them to the Hinckley Reservation home of Wildcat Cavern in Whip's Edges. As the gathering moved toward Wildcat Cavern, a substantial feeling of expectation and energy hung in the air. Maurice specifically couldn't contain his enthusiasm for investigating the cavern, despite the fact that he and his companions had visited the cavern on past field trips. This time, the experience was bound to go off in a strange direction. The cavern had never been authoritatively planned or completely investigated, so we reproduced the interior sections in light of them. Stories and chronicled records. Accessible Wildcat Cavern, settled in a sandstone precipice, flaunted an entry 15 ft wide and 4 ft high, looking like a dim, rough mouth. While the outside and its environmental factors were well known among local people, the inside held on to a captivating history. Over the years, the cavern had filled in as a shelter for crooks and runaway slaves, developing a legend that, additional to its air of secret and disquiet, entering the cavern, one would experience a limited entry approximately 80 feet long, known as the principal burrow. At its end, an opening uncovered an enormous inclining rock that ruled the space, proceeding with directly starting here. The section prompted a sizable chamber, trusted by nearby custom to have been a 19th century concealing put for got away from slaves in transit to Canada. It was not difficult to mistake this entry for 2 others around the inclining rock, particularly without legitimate lighting and past experience inside the cavern. Since nobody had investigated these sections before they stayed unfamiliar, the gathering of 3 chose to slide into the cavern and investigate a well-known chamber. Maurice elected to lead the gathering, anxious to grandstand his past experience, exploring the primary passage anyway. His certainty before long dwindled, as he understood his previous experiences had not set him up sufficiently for what lay ahead. At first, strolling inside the primary passage establishes an agreeable climate with sufficient room to move. After around 60 ft, however, the passage starts to shrivel, expecting pilgrims to move in a crouching position. After arriving at the intersection, Maurice saw a huge stone and accepted that the section to the enormous chamber followed its ebb and flow, with nobody scrutinizing his choice to continue forward. He continued onward. As Maurice went into the cleft, the space for moving diminished dramatically, compelling him to creep on his stomach. Claustrophobia grasped him as the cavern encompassed him in murkiness. However, Bates stayed persuaded that the opening to the huge chamber lay ahead, only a couple, not many more feet away. Inch by inch, he started to feel tension around his middle and hips. What Maurice didn't understand in that frame of mind of the pressburrow was that he was slithering downwards. The human body depends on the vestibular contraption to decide its equilibrium and position without sufficient visual data. For example, in murkiness, equilibrium can be impacted as the eyes accumulate data about direction from the climate pushing increasingly hard. Maurice ended up in a circumstance like J. and Edward Jones, where the declining way prompted a sharp, calculated fissure. The 110 lb57 kid crawled into the soggy, dangerous fissure and tumbled directly into a 9-in break, sticking his hips and body anxious to get away from the limits of the halfway house and appreciate light-hearted minutes with his companions. Morris ended up wrestling with the outcomes of his decisions. The cavern, once supposed to be an intriguing spot to investigate, had now turned into a possible grave for him as he explored. Limited entries and turned in restricted spaces, his body became shrouded in cuts and scratches. The crucial point in time showed up when Morris acknowledged he was separated from everyone else in the profundities of the cavern. He was unable to move, unfit to move. He called to his 2 buddies for help. However, it required some investment for them. Young men to grasp what is happening and comprehend where the frantic shout was coming from. Out of dread, they hustled to get an instructor who got into the cavern and attempted to utilize his belt to rope the kid's lower leg. The educator couldn't draw near enough to Morris, terrified of stalling out also. Once he arrived at the most secure zone, he tossed the belt onto Morris' feet and begun pulling. Achievement appeared to ease up, yet it finished rapidly when the belt broke and Betel wedged further into the hole. As of now, Morris began encountering trouble breathing because of the external strain on his chest. In the dimness and cold, the educator could hear dread and frenzy into Morris' voice as he implored him to find another person to save him. The educator promptly called for proficient assistance. The main on the scene was fire boss Paul Chodura, who drove a crew to Wildcat cavern. Firemen introduced a versatile generator to light the cavern, and crews funneled oxygen to the kid. They chose to utilize a pulley framework with snares, yet the salvage endeavors confronted critical difficulties. The geology of the cavern gave eccentric impediments, restricted sections, and sharp twists, making access troublesome. Morris was caught an impressive separation from the entry, further confusing endeavors to contact him, restricted perceivability, and claustrophobic circumstances inside the cave added one more layer of trouble to the salvage. Each move was executed with alert, considering the constant hazard of injury to the heroes and the potential for deteriorating. What is going on? Joining strategic expertise and amazing boldness, the heroes investigated different procedures to liberate Morris from his tricky position. Project workers proposed to penetrate through 36 ft of stone. However, geologists dreaded a cavern inexplosive was precluded to the situation. Hauled into the evening, an uneasiness developed among both the heroes and the defenseless spectators watching what is going on from outside the cavern. The temperature plunged into the 30s, as in excess of 200 crisis laborers, observers, family members, and journalists accumulated at the scene. The narrative of the caught kid became headline news the nation over, and the Met, subject of public TV programs. Radio stations pursued for help from the local area, inciting Evelyn Pinky Petit, a 5'2" lb medical caretaker, from Aachen to DV drive to the cavern and wriggle into the entry. She could draw no nearer than 5 feet, except for spent almost 3 hours encouraging the kid, while heroes arranged another strategy to haul Morris out. One of the techniques was proposed by experienced cave voyager Terry Brown of Aachen, who recommended fixing an unrehearsed pulley rather than snares with a metal ring spiked to the top of the cavern. Heroes pulled and pulled, yet intense, moved a couple inches just to be pushed in reverse. Once the pulley delivered, the primary worry of the heroes was Morris' cognizance. In the event that the kid dropped, there would be no strategy to haul him out without his own work. Every one of these subtleties infer the nutty clay cave misfortune salvage mission that finished the second. John Jones passed out, pulling the body from the cleft, utilizing various techniques, takes just 80%, and the leftover 20% must continuously be loaded up with the casualties, pushing endeavors. The entire evening, heroes continued to attempt to encourage the kid. They inquired as to whether he had a sweetheart. They guaranteed him a fancy meal. They made the most of him to 25 and back again. Many people offered help, yet many couldn't draw near. sufficient subsequent to entering the cavern. It's been more than 24 hours, and right now, heroes were left with just a single endeavor, as Morris' responses turned out to be increasingly unclear, and there was simply no time left. In the first part of the day, the U.S. Flying Corps flew a group from the Public Spatial Society in Washington, D.C. Mechanic Curtis Peake and his uncle Paul P.E. concocted an arrangement, and to execute it, they sent 15 years of age bird scout Michael Reich of North Royalton, who wriggled into the cleft. He had the option to draw nearer to Morris than any other individual had before. Michael tossed a rope to Morris, and he was ready to pull it over his arms. As Ryrie later told correspondents, Morris lay on his right side and could utilize one arm. As per Michael, it was very close and unnerving. In there, he was told to utilize a glycerin arrangement by pouring it on Morris' hips to make them tricky, after which he pushed a restricted help load up under Morris' legs to make less contact. Once pulling began with Michael's order, the group began pulling baits. Old slipped a couple of times, however. With firm pulling from above, he broke free. Loud cheers emerged as the kid was enveloped by a sweeping and lifted out of the section. Over 24 hours after the trial started, many onlookers commended as the youngster was stacked into a holding-up emergency vehicle. Luckily, the place of the kid was around 60, which assisted him with remaining alive for such an extensive stretch of time. On the off chance that the hole had been more extreme, Morris could never have had as much time until heroes sorted out the best technique to haul him out. The Recreation Area Administration dynamited the rear of Wildcat Cavern hours after Chompold was liberated, in basically the same manner with Nutty Clay Cave. The entry was forever fixed with concrete. The example was learned for the following 44 years until everything rehashed, except this time with a terrible completion.